What's up, folks? We're falling a little bit behind on the video game, but this one here is going to get us caught up. Right now we're going to talk about the sheathing and the house wrap both. I didn't get any video of installing either one because frankly I had my hands full and I knew that there wasn't that much to it. We're just going to talk about all the specifics of it right now. We're also gonna work in backwards order just because it makes sense because I'm standing right here. With the house wrap, you've got a lot of different products. I did not realize this whenever I ordered my lumber package for both buildings. I just told them, I said, hey, I need some house wrap. I told them how much wall I had, and they sent me the stuff. I did not specify what I wanted. If you look over here on the first unit, you can see how sort of translucent that is. It's kind of opaque. You can see the windows behind it. It's a woven, it's like a very thin tarp. It's just flat out not the best product. It does get the job done and it meets industry standards and all that stuff. But installation is a lot more difficult because it's not as rigid. Obviously, you don't have as much moisture protection. It's just a thinner product. Like I said, it'll get the job done, but for the cost difference between the two, I would really recommend going with something like the traditional THOW home wrap. That is a thicker paper product. They come in the same size rolls, same lengths, all that stuff. The THOW is a little bit more expensive, but I would highly recommend doing that. You can see on the first one how I've got quite a few wrinkles in it. I had to make a big cut in it to pull out some slack and retape that up. And this was with 2 people installing it. Now we come over to this one, you can see it just looks a whole lot better, and I installed it on my own. So it's a lot more, like I said, it's a lot more rigid, it's easier to hang, it lays flat, you can't really pull wrinkles in it and stuff like that near as much. That is definitely what I would recommend going on the trial and error theme of this channel. Now you don't have to buy that stuff first. We'll get into the fasteners. I'll show you some of those. You can staple this stuff, but the cap nails that I'm about to show you have a lot better hold. They create a lot better barrier, just a better product. Obviously, a staple is easier to install, but they do make auto drivers for the cap nails as well. I didn't use one. I did all this with a hammer because it's what I got. I will probably buy a cap nail gun in the future for the next builds, but we got it done. I'll show you what we're looking at here. Here you can see these cap nails. Probably got one laying on the ground somewhere. It's literally just a short ring shank nail with a plastic cap on it. And you're gonna go in, you wanna get these somewhere 12 to 18 inches apart. You wanna just get good coverage. That way everything is laying down nice and flat, and any wind or anything like that's not gonna be able to bring it up and mess you up in the meantime until you get your siding on. You also want as few wrinkles as possible under that siding because this is your moisture barrier. If water gets behind your siding, you want it to run all the way down to the bottom here. But if you've got wrinkles and stuff, that's potentially places that could hold water. Say you've got a wrinkle around one of your fasteners, there's a potential that water pools there and will get behind that layer. You do want to hit your studs. These nails don't come through the sheathing that much, but you're just gonna get a better hold if you hit your studs. And if you also hit your studs, you're going to know where they are when you go to install your siding. It's gonna make it easier to hit those studs that way. That's about it. I'm gonna show you how I installed it by myself because it was a really cool method that I found. I'm gonna mention the channel that I found it on in the description, but I don't know what channel that is right now. The best way that I found to do this is I took a long pipe clamp and put it through my roll, and then took the top of the pipe clamp off, obviously, but I've still got the bottom of the pipe clamp here as my stop. And you just work it around the building, and you can adjust your height here to keep it level. I'll kind of show you what that looks like. I've got this back wall open because they do need to inspect it for the framing and sheathing inspection. They don't ask to see the entire building. They don't want to see every nail pattern of every sheet, but they do want to see a good example of how you're doing things. That's why this is open. What I'll do here, I'll just kind of roll out a good bit of excess while it's sitting here on the clamp, and then pick it up. You got to kind of work around these jacks. but you're just gonna color it around the building. And that's just a really good process. You can see when you got it set up and you need to raise it up a little bit. You can tell it needs to come up. Then you'll just take your pipe clamp, move it up, pull those wrinkles out, nice and flat, pin it down. That's your first layer. I wanna start at the bottom. You can do thinner, smaller strips. That's fine. I wanted to do one solid one because we've got the tall roll, we've got enough wall, and obviously a solid barrier is gonna be a little bit better than a layered taped up barrier. When you get to your next layers, you can see on the top, you can't see that here, but maybe you can see it around that wall you saw it a minute ago. You'll take a smaller roll. You wanna overhang 6 inches over your layers. What I did, you can see how much space I've got there, just a couple of feet. The additional roll I've got is a 3-foot wide roll. So I just indexed that on the top and let it overhang as much as it could. We've got, step around the side here. You can see we've got quite a bit of overhang on that corner. Then what you wanna do is you wanna tape those seams. You wanna take your Tyvek tape or something equivalent and tape those seams. You need 1.5 inches of tape coverage on either side of that seam. So if you've got a thinner roll like I had, you're just gonna do multiple layers of tape to create that distance. That covers it on the house wrap. I'm gonna talk about the sheathing now. I've got a good example wall here to show you. Roll this up, get there. All right, so now we'll talk about the sheathing. That is in reverse order, but it just made sense for where my camera was and where I am, what I'm doing. With your sheathing, you're gonna take, usually you're gonna go with 7/16 OSB. If you're going the OSB route, this is what it looks like. There are other systems. The zip system looks really cool. I didn't know anything about it, so I just didn't dive into it. But I may do that on the next builds. It basically eliminates the need for house wrap. It's a better moisture barrier. It's a better system. You're generally gonna have 7/16 OSB sheathing, and you're gonna put that up against your studs. The NOAA certification code does require liquid nails or some sort of construction adhesive on every stud. So you're gonna cover all your studs, you're gonna run a bead of that construction adhesive. The sheathing is where your structure really becomes rigid. When you're putting your walls up and you're squaring everything up, you've still got a lot of play, you've still got a lot of wiggle room like I showed you in that framing video, but your sheathing is what is going to lock everything in. You wanna make sure everything is good and square before you start throwing up your sheathing. But it's, again, a pretty simple process. You'll start with full sheets. You want to stagger your seams. You can't just have a grid of sheets like this where you have 4 corners meeting in the middle. On this wall, I can't give you any example of that because we've just got an 8-foot wide wall. So we've got a full sheet here, did 2 patches over here, and then a full sheet on top. And you can see here, we've got our studs chalk lined. Running those chalk lines makes that just a lot easier when you go to nail this thing up. It takes another extra minute to do the chalk lines, but if you don't, you'll find yourself missing all over the place and putting holes in your wall that don't need to be there. Getting into the weeds a little bit, your nails are a little bit different than your framing nails. So your framing nails, you're gonna use a smooth shank framing nail. They're designed to have a little wiggle, to have a little give. That way when your framing flexes and you're installing it, it works out a lot better that way. For these, you want a good rigid hold. You're gonna use an 8D ring shank nail, and those ring shank nails hold. If you've got 3 or 4 nails in this thing and you go to pull a sheet off, it's gonna either tear that nail through the sheet or it's gonna break your sheet. They're very strong holding nails, and that's what you want. If you're using a nail gun, you wanna set it to where your head is about at the surface. What that's gonna do is do the least damage possible to your sheathing and gonna give you the best possible hold there. It's gonna give you the best racking strength in the system. As far as your windows and door openings go, there's a lot of different ways you can do that as well. You can sheath up the entire building, full coverage. I should probably jump in at this point and note that your vertical seams do have to be solid backed, so they all have to fall on a stud. And then come in and cut that out. Obviously you're gonna have a lot of waste that way, or you can come in and cut your sheets to the dimensions that they need to be before you put them up. A lot of times that means cutting a shape like this out, or you might have something a little more complex. So that does get tricky to nail it just right, to get it exactly right. What we did was just a little bit of a hybrid of that. When you go to cut this waste out, you can do it several ways. I found that with a good Sawzall and a good Sawzall blade, you can get this pretty tight, pretty close to this profile, just resting your blade on your stud and using that as a reference. You are gonna have a little bit of wiggle here. So that's when I came through and cleaned out that with a tracer bit on my router to get it exactly the same surface as your surrounding studs. You can come through and say, you start a hole, take your router with your tracer bit and go all the way around the opening. That does work. I've done it before. I did it on the first building quite a bit. It is a very messy process. It's a very loud process. And if you have much experience with a hand router that's powerful enough for this kind of thing, it's just not that much fun, to be honest. I took most of the waste out, like I said, with that Sawzall, and then just came and cleaned it up real nice and tight with that tracer bit. The less material you're cutting with your router, the better. When you're putting your sheathing up, it is going to expand and contract with natural changes in humidity and temperature and things like that. If you butt your seams up directly to each other touching, you run the risk of some deformity happening down the road when those sheets expand, and it'll want to push that seam up or in, and it's going to take your flat wall and give some wave to it, which you don't want. It doesn't look good, and it's not as strong that way. However you want to create this gap, they make these really cool H clips like this right here. They clip around each sheet and establish that gap. These also are going to keep this surface the same. If one wanted to bow out in between your studs, it's going to kind of keep those uniform. Your fastener spacing is 4 and 8 on your wall sheathing. You want at least 4-inch spacing on all of your perimeters. That's around all your openings, that's down your solid sides, that's down your bottom, and then in your field, you want a minimum 8-inch spacing. Obviously, these are not going to be exact. You can see a lot of these are a lot closer together than 4 inches, and that's just what it is. But as long as you're satisfying that maximum distance requirement, then you're going to be good. You're going to get a good hold. You're going to pass your inspections. You're going to be happy. The roof sheathing works the exact same way, but your fastener spacing is closer together. So you've got 3-inch on your perimeters and 6-inch in your field. And that's all I've got for you, folks. Sorry for the information overload. If you got any questions, let us know in the comments and I will be sure to address those. Stay tuned. Next video, I'm going to show you how to put the ice and water shield up on top, and we're going to keep this trainer rolling.